The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. 7 ancient races sat at the Great Council table, and they had never lost a war. This was not because they were unbeatable. It was because no species had ever been stupid enough to truly fight them. The elder races controlled everything. They owned the trade routes. They decided which species could travel between stars. They chose who lived in comfort and who struggled in the dark corners of the galaxy. For thousands of years, younger species bowed their heads and accepted their place. What else could they do? The elder races had ships that could crack planets. They had weapons that could burn whole star systems. Fighting them was not brave. It was suicide. And then there were the humans. Humanity had discovered faster-than-light travel only 200 years ago. In galactic terms, they were babies. They controlled 40 small worlds in a quiet corner of space called the Orion Spur. The elder races found them amusing. Humans lived such short lives. 80 years, maybe 100 if they were lucky. They spent half that time sleeping. They argued with each other constantly. Their governments rose and fell like waves on a beach. The Melodari, a race of telepaths who lived for thousands of years, had studied humans carefully. Their report to the Concord was simple. Humans were emotional, chaotic, and divided. They would never be a threat. They would never be anything at all, the Vethkai Dominion agreed. The Vethkai were warriors. Their scales were thick as armor. Their eyes saw in the dark. They had conquered dozens of species, and they looked at humanity the way a giant looks at an insect. Interesting, perhaps, but not important. So when the Vethkai decided they wanted 3 human agricultural worlds on the border, they did not expect any problems. These worlds grew food, good food. The Vethkai wanted that food. In their minds, the matter was simple. They would take the worlds. The humans would complain. The Concord would tell the humans to be quiet, and life would continue as it always had. The Vethkai fleet arrived at New Helsinki on a cold morning in March. 30 warships hung in orbit above the green and blue planet. The colony had only 2 million people. They had no warships. They had no orbital defenses. They had farmers and teachers and children who had never seen war. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked down at the helpless world. He felt nothing. This was not cruelty. This was simply how the galaxy worked. The strong took. The weak gave. Humans were weak. Therefore, humans would give. He opened a communication channel to the planet below. "People of New Helsinki," he said. His voice was calm, almost bored. "The Vethkai Dominion claims this world and its resources. You have 6 hours to surrender your government and accept Dominion administration. If you do not surrender, we will begin orbital cleansing. This is not negotiable. This is not a discussion. You have 6 hours." He closed the channel and turned to his officers. "Prepare landing troops. I expect surrender within 2 hours." These humans always break quickly, but something strange happened. The humans did not surrender in 2 hours. They did not surrender in 4 hours. As the deadline approached, Admiral Korath received a message from New Helsinki's governor. The message was short. "We will not surrender. Not today. Not ever. Do what you will." Korath stared at the message for a long moment. He almost laughed. Did these creatures not understand? He had 30 warships. He could burn their cities to ash. He could boil their oceans. What did they hope to accomplish by refusing? He gave the order to begin bombardment. The news of New Helsinki spread across human space like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every human world knew what had happened. The Vethkai expected panic. They expected humans to flood the Concord with desperate pleas for help. They expected humanity to fragment, as young species always did when faced with true power. They were wrong. Something happened that the elder races had never seen before. Human governments that had argued for centuries suddenly stopped arguing. Old enemies shook hands. Ancient grudges were set aside. Political parties that had fought each other for generations issued joint statements. Religious leaders who had never agreed on anything stood together and spoke with one voice. Within 72 hours, Every human government in existence declared war on the Vethkai Dominion, not requests for negotiation, not appeals to the Concord. War, total, absolute. Unlimited war. The Galactic Concord received the declarations with confusion. Ambassador Kirith of the Vethkai read through the documents and laughed out loud. The sound echoed through the great council chamber, and other elder race representatives smiled along with him. How delightful, Kirith said. He held up one of the declarations like a trophy. The insects have decided to fight. I did not know humans had such wonderful senses of humor. The Melodari representative did not smile. She was old, even by the standards of her long-lived race. She had seen many things in her 4,000 years. Something about the human declarations bothered her. Something in the words, something in the speed with which they had united. She tried to read the emotions behind the documents, but all she found was cold, hard resolve. Perhaps, she said quietly, we should take this more seriously. Kirith waved his clawed hand dismissively. They have 40 worlds. We have 400. They have been in space for 2 centuries. We have been conquering for 8,000 years. What can they possibly do? A door opened at the far end of the chamber. The human ambassador walked in. Her name was Alina Vasquez. She was small by Vethkai standards, barely reaching Kirith's chest. Her hair was gray. Her face was lined with age. She moved slowly, leaning on a simple wooden cane, but her eyes were not old. Her eyes burned with something the elder races had not seen in thousands of years, something they had almost forgotten existed. She stopped in the center of the chamber and looked at Kirith. I am here to formally deliver humanity's declaration of war, she said. Her voice was calm and steady. I am also here to give you one chance to withdraw from our worlds. One chance. Take it, and this ends. Refuse, and you will learn something the galaxy has forgotten. Kirith leaned forward, amused. And what is that, little human? Alina Vasquez smiled. It was not a warm smile. You will learn why humans have spent their entire existence fighting each other. You will learn what happens when we stop fighting each other and start fighting someone else. You will learn that you have made a terrible mistake. She turned and walked toward the door. But most importantly, she said without looking back, you will learn that we do not know how to surrender. We never have. We never will. You wanted war with humanity, Ambassador? You are about to get exactly what you asked for. The door closed behind her, in the silence that followed. The Melodar representative spoke again. Perhaps, she said, we should take this very seriously indeed. But by then, it was already too late. 3 months into the war, the Vethkai were winning. At least that is what their reports said. Their fleets had conquered 12 human worlds. Their soldiers had planted Dominion flags on a dozen planets. Their admirals sent messages of victory back to the homeworld, speaking of easy battles and weak resistance. The war would be over soon, they said. Humanity would break. Humanity would surrender. Humanity would learn its place. But something was wrong. Admiral Vorith stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the reports with growing unease. Yes, they had taken 12 worlds. Yes, they had won every major battle. But the numbers did not make sense. They were losing ships. Not in battles. In transit. Supply convoys were vanishing. Communication relays were going silent. Fuel depots were exploding for no apparent reason. Another convoy lost, his aide reported. 15 cargo ships. They were carrying ammunition and food for the occupation forces on New Helsinki. Borit's claws scratched against his command chair. How, we do not know, Admiral. There was no distress signal. No evidence of attack. They simply stopped transmitting. This was happening everywhere. Vethkai ships would travel through what should be safe space, and they would never arrive. Sometimes debris was found. Sometimes there was nothing at all. The humans were not fighting the Vethkai fleet. They were making the fleet bleed from 1,000 tiny cuts. On the occupied worlds, things were even stranger. The Vethkai had expected the humans to submit once their governments fell. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. Conquered species accepted their fate and cooperated with their new rulers. The humans did not. Cooperate? When the Vethkai troops landed on New Helsinki, they found empty cities. The people had fled into the forests, into underground bunkers, into places the Vethkai could not find. Every night, explosions echoed in the darkness. Every morning, Vethkai soldiers were found dead in their beds. Supply buildings burned. Vehicles stopped working. Poison appeared in food stores. The humans had a name for this. They called it resistance. They called it guerrilla warfare. They called it making the enemy pay for every single inch of ground commander. Zeleth was in charge of the occupation of New Helsinki. He had conquered 9 worlds in his career. He had never seen anything like this. For every resistance fighter his troops killed, 2 more seemed to appear. The humans were not soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, shopkeepers. Old men and young women, children who could barely hold weapons. But they fought. They fought with knives and stolen guns and homemade explosives. They fought with tricks and traps and endless patience. They did not care if they died. They only cared about taking Vethkai soldiers with them. Zeleth sent a report to High Command. His words were careful, but his meaning was clear. "We are not fighting an army," he wrote. "We are fighting a population. Every human on this world is an enemy. They do not surrender. They do not negotiate. They simply wait for the chance to kill us. I have lost more soldiers in 3 months of occupation than I lost in the entire conquest of the Threlian system. I need reinforcements. I need more troops. Or I need permission to reduce this world to ash." High Command sent reinforcements. They did not give permission for destruction. The humans had to be conquered, not exterminated. The galaxy was watching. The Concord was watching. The Vethkai had to prove that they could break humanity through strength. Not massacre, but humanity would not break. The Melodari Collective sent an observer to the front lines. Her name was Siroth, and she was over 3,000 years old. She had seen wars before. She had watched species rise and fall. She thought she understood conflict. She was wrong. Siroth spent 2 months traveling through the war zone. She visited occupied worlds. She watched battles. She tried to read human minds to understand what drove them. What she found terrified her. She sent a message back to the Concord. The message was short, but every word carried weight. The humans are not trying to win battles. They are trying to make the Vethkai bleed for every inch of space they take. They have a concept called attrition. They believe that if they can make the war painful enough, long enough, the Vethkai will eventually give up. They are willing to fight for decades, for generations. They are willing to lose 100 soldiers for every Vethkai they kill, because they believe that eventually the numbers will turn in their favor. The Concord received this message with confusion. No species fought like that. No species accepted such losses willingly. It was madness, but madness was winning. Admiral Korath, the officer who had first attacked New Helsinki, sat in his private quarters and stared at the casualty reports. In 3 months, he had lost more ships to sabotage and ambush than the Dominion had lost in 1,000 years of other wars. His supply lines were chaos. His occupied worlds were bleeding troops, and the humans showed no sign of stopping. His aide entered the room with another report. Another convoy lost. Another outpost destroyed. Another 100 soldiers dead. What kind of species fights like this? Korath asked. His voice was tired, confused. What kind of species considers this a viable strategy? His aide was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. A species that has spent its entire existence fighting itself, Admiral. We studied their history. They have never known true peace. They have fought over land, over resources, over ideas. They have concepts we do not even have words for. Trench warfare, scorched earth, mutual assured destruction. They have spent thousands of years learning how to hurt each other. Now they are using those skills against us. Korath closed his eyes. They live such short lives, 80 years. How can they afford to waste those years in endless war? Perhaps his aide said slowly. That is exactly why they can afford it. We live for millennia, Admiral. We think in centuries. We are patient because we have time. But humans do not have time. They know their lives are short. They know their deaths are coming. And so they do not fear death the way we do. They have nothing to lose. Korath opened his eyes and looked at the star map on his wall. 12 conquered worlds. Dozens more still free. Supply lines stretching across hundreds of light years. And somewhere out there, humans were watching, waiting, planning. What have we started? He whispered. His aide had no answer. In the darkness of space, human ships moved like ghosts. They struck without warning and vanished without trace. They could not defeat the Vethkai in open battle. They did not try. Instead, they made the Vethkai pay for every parsec of space. They made every supply run a gamble. They made every occupied world a nightmare, and slowly, very slowly, felt. The Vethkai began to understand something that no elder race had ever understood before. War was not about winning battles. War was about breaking the enemy's will. And humanity's will was made of iron and fire and endless, terrible patience. The Vethkai had won every battle. They were losing the war. The war entered its second year. And the Vethkai Dominion made a decision that would haunt them for generations. They committed everything. Every reserve fleet, every trained soldier, every warship they could spare from other duties. High Command believed that one massive push would finally break humanity. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 30 human worlds now flew Dominion flags. Vethkai forces stretched across hundreds of light years, trying to hold what they had taken while pushing for more. Their supply lines grew longer. Their troops grew more tired. Their ships needed constant repair and refueling. And humanity waited for 12 months. The humans had fought a defensive war. They had hidden in shadows. They had struck from darkness and vanished like smoke. The elder races believed this was all they could do. The humans were weak. The humans were desperate. The humans had no choice but to run and hide. The elder races were wrong, while human soldiers died defending their homes. While resistance fighters bled on occupied worlds, something else was happening in the free territories. Every human shipyard was running day and night. Factories that had made farming equipment now made weapons. Schools closed so that teachers could build ammunition. Retirement homes emptied as old men and women returned to work in weapons plants. Human scientists studied every piece of Vethkai technology they captured. They pulled apart enemy ships. They analyzed alien weapons. They learned how elder race shields worked, how their engines functioned, how their communication systems operated. And then they did something that no species in galactic history had ever done before. They improved it. The elder races developed technology slowly. They took centuries to refine a new weapon. They tested and retested. They moved carefully, patiently, because they had all the time in the universe. Their technology was better than human technology, but it was also old. It was settled. It was done. Human technology was chaos. Human engineers did not have centuries. They had months, weeks, sometimes days, so they worked without sleep. They broke rules that elder race scientists considered sacred. They combined systems that should not work together. They built ugly, unstable, brilliant machines that should have exploded but somehow flew anyway. 12 months of building. 12 months of learning. 12 months of preparation. The trap was ready. Admiral Vorath commanded the largest Vethkai fleet ever assembled in one place. 200 warships hung in formation, preparing to attack a major human world called Novaterra. Intelligence said the planet had minimal defenses. This would be an easy victory. Another step toward ending the war. Vorath gave the order to advance. His fleet crossed into human space and found nothing. No defenders. No resistance. The path to Novaterra was completely open. Vorath felt the first cold touch of doubt. This was too easy, but he pushed the feeling aside and continued forward. Then his communications officer spoke. Admiral, we are receiving reports from across the fleet zone. Attacks on our supply stations. Attacks on our fuel depots. Attacks on our communication relays. Vorith turned. What attacks? From where? Everywhere, Admiral. The reports are coming from everywhere. In a single coordinated strike, humanity revealed what it had been building. Across 200 light-years, human fleets appeared from hiding places that intelligence had never detected. But they did not attack military targets. They attacked the support systems. The fuel that kept Vethkai ships running. The ammunition that filled their weapons. The food that fed their soldiers. The communications that let them coordinate Operation Prometheus. That was what the humans called it. They had studied the Vethkai for a year. They had learned that the Dominion depended on long supply lines. They had learned that Vethkai ships needed constant refueling. They had learned that the whole war machine was fragile if you hit the right points, and they hit every point at once. Vorith watched in horror as his tactical display filled with emergency signals. Supply station destroyed. Fuel depot burning. Communication relay silent. His fleet was deep in human space, and suddenly they had no way to refuel. No way to resupply. No way to call for help. Admiral, his aide said, voice shaking. Human fleet detected. Bearing 047. They are coming directly at us. Vorith looked at the tactical display and felt his blood freeze. The human fleet was twice the size of anything intelligence had predicted. Ships that should not exist. Ships that had been built in secret in just 12 months while humanity pretended to be losing. How? He whispered. How do they have so many ships? His aide's answer was simple and terrible. They built them, Admiral. They have been building them every day since we first attacked. The Battle of Novatera lasted 6 hours. The Vethkai fought bravely. They fought with everything they had, but their ships were running low on fuel. Their weapons were running out of ammunition. Their crews were tired and confused and scared. The humans were none of those things. Human ships moved in formations that Vethkai commanders had never seen. They used tactics that broke every rule of elder race warfare. They did not fight with honor. They did not fight with tradition. They fought to win. They fought to survive. They fought with the desperate fury of a species that had been pushed too far. When the battle ended, Vorith's fleet was scattered. 40 ships destroyed. 60 more damaged beyond immediate repair. The rest running for safety with nearly empty fuel tanks. The humans did not chase them. They did not need to. They had made their point. On the Galactic Concord station, the elder races watched recordings of the battle in stunned silence. The Melodari observer Suroth spoke first. We have made a terrible mistake, she said. We thought humans were primitive because they innovated slowly before the war. We did not understand. They innovate slowly in peace because they are patient. They innovate fast in war because they must. They treat technological development like warfare itself. They iterate. They adapt. They evolve. What takes us centuries takes them months when their survival is at stake. The Vethkai ambassador said nothing. He stared at the recordings with empty eyes. His people had been undefeated for 8,000 years. Now, in a single day, a species that had been in space for only 2 centuries had crippled the mightiest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled. Across human space,
celebrations erupted.
For the first time since the war began, humanity had won a major victory. The news spread to occupied worlds and resistance fighters took heart. They were not alone. They were not forgotten. Help was coming. On Novatera, a human general stood on a balcony and looked up at the stars. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she had planned Operation Prometheus. She had spent 12 months pretending to lose while secretly preparing to win. Her aide approached and saluted. General, the Vethkai fleet is in full retreat. Our forces are pursuing. What are your orders? Chen smiled. It was not a cruel smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally been given permission to fight. Tell all commands to advance. We are done hiding. We are done running. We are done playing defense. She looked at the stars, and her eyes were hard as steel. It is time to show the galaxy what happens when you wake up humanity. The wolves had awakened, and they were hungry. For the first time in 4,000 years, the Galactic Concord met to discuss intervention in a war, but they were not meeting to help the Vethkai win. They were meeting to prevent their total destruction. The Great Council chamber was silent. Representatives of the 7 elder races sat in their ancient chairs and looked at each other with fear in their eyes. On the holographic display in the center of the room, a map showed the war's progress. 12 months ago, the map had been mostly Vethkai blue. Now human green was spreading like fire across the stars, the Melodari Elder. Sireth presented her final report on humanity. She had spent 2 years studying them. She had read their history. She had touched their minds. She had learned things that made her ancient heart tremble. "You must understand what we are dealing with," she said. Her voice was quiet, but every being in the chamber listened. Humanity is not like other young species. They are something different. Something dangerous. She activated a series of images. Human history spread across the display. Wars. Endless wars. Humans fighting humans. Empires rising and falling. Weapons becoming more and more terrible. Bombs that could destroy cities. Weapons that could poison entire continents. They have never known true peace, Sarath continued. Their entire existence has been war. They have fought each other over land, over resources, over ideas, over things so small that we cannot even comprehend them. They have developed concepts that no other species has ever needed. She spoke new words. Strange words. Mutually assured destruction. Total war. Unconditional surrender. Guerrilla warfare. Terrorism. Blitzkrieg. Scorched earth. They have spent thousands of years learning how to hurt each other, she said. And now they are using that knowledge against us. A Vethkai representative spoke. His voice was angry, but there was fear underneath. They are still just one species. They still have fewer ships, fewer soldiers, fewer resources. We can still win. Sroth turned to him with something like pity in her eyes. Can you? Let me tell you what our scholars have learned about human psychology. She brought up new images. Human soldiers. Human resistance fighters. Human civilians standing in the ruins of their homes with weapons in their hands. Humans are a predator species that also shows prey behaviors. This makes them unpredictable. They can be patient like hunters, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They can also be desperate like cornered animals, fighting with everything they have when escape seems impossible. More importantly, humans form what they call trauma bonds. When they suffer losses, they do not become weaker. They become stronger. Every human who dies in this war becomes a martyr. Every destroyed city becomes a rallying cry. Every atrocity committed against them is remembered for generations. She paused, and her next words fell like stones into still water. They have a concept called spite. It means they will accept their own destruction, if it means taking their enemy with them. They would rather die than submit. They would rather burn their own worlds than let someone else take them. Silence filled the chamber. The elder races had conquered dozens of species. Those species had always, eventually, submitted. They had calculated the odds, seen that resistance was futile, and surrendered to save what they could. That was logical. That was rational. That was how civilization worked. Humans were not rational. The debate continued for hours. Some argued for joining the war against humanity while there was still time. Others argued for forcing a peace. Others simply wanted to isolate human space and hope the problem went away. Then the doors opened. An ambassador, Alina Vasquez, entered. She was older now than when she had last stood in this chamber. The war had aged her. Gray hair had turned white. Lines had deepened around her eyes. She walked with a cane, her steps slow and careful, but her eyes had not changed. Her eyes still burned. "You asked me to come," she said. "So I have come." The Concord leader, a being so old that even the other elder races did not know his true age, spoke. "Ambassador, we wish to discuss the possibility of peace." Vasquez smiled. It was not a warm smile. Peace. Interesting. 2 years ago, when your member state attacked our worlds without warning, we asked for peace. We asked you to intervene. You laughed at us. You told us to accept our place. Circumstances have changed, the leader said carefully. Yes, they have. We have driven the Vethkai from half the worlds they stole. We have destroyed a third of their fleet. We have shattered their reputation as an unbeatable power. Now you want peace. She laughs softly. How convenient. What do you want? A Vethkai representative demanded, What will it take to end this war? Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. We want what we have always wanted. We want to be left alone. We want our worlds back. We want recognition of our sovereignty. We want the Vethkai to pay for the destruction they caused. And we want a seat on this Concord with full voting rights as equals. And if we refuse? The Vethkai representative asked. Vasquez looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, no hatred. Just cold, hard certainty. Then we will continue this war until one of us no longer exists. We will not surrender. We cannot surrender. It is not in our nature. Your scholars studied our history. They should have told you this. We have a saying among our people. Give me liberty or give me death. You thought that was poetry? A nice phrase for speeches and ceremonies. She stepped closer to the council table. It is not poetry. It is policy. It is who we are. Every human child learns the stories of ancestors who chose death over submission. We remember our martyrs for centuries. We build statues to those who died fighting. We consider surrender the worst shame imaginable. She looked around the chamber at the ancient, immortal beings who had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. You have lived so long that you have forgotten what it means to truly believe in something. You calculate. You negotiate. You compromise. We do not. When we believe something is worth dying for, we die for it. When we believe something is worth killing for, we kill for it. That is why you are afraid of us. That is why you should be. Then her voice softened. Just slightly. Just enough to show that there was still something human underneath the iron. But we are not monsters. We do not want to destroy the Vethkai. We do not want revenge. We want justice, and then we want peace. Accept our terms, and this war ends today. Your people can go home. Our people can rebuild. The galaxy can move forward. She turned and walked toward the door. You have 1 month to decide. After that, we resume our advance. And we will not stop until we reach the Vethkai homeworld itself. She paused at the door and looked back one last time. Choose wisely. You will not get another chance. The door closed behind her in the silence that followed. The Concord leader spoke. I believe, he said slowly, that we should take this very seriously indeed. No one disagreed. The Vethkai accepted the peace terms on the 28th day. There was no ceremony. No grand announcement. Just a quiet message sent from the Dominion capital to the human high command. We accept. We withdraw. The war is over. Across human space, the news spread like sunrise. In cities that had been under occupation, people poured into the streets. Tears fell. Songs were sung. Families who had been separated for years embraced each other. Children who had grown up knowing nothing but war learned a new word, peace. But the galaxy was watching something else, something that would change everything they thought they knew about humanity. The Vethkai forces began their withdrawal. Warships that had occupied human worlds for years powered up their engines and prepared to leave. On the ground, Vethkai soldiers packed their equipment and marched toward transport ships. They expected resistance. They expected revenge. Every species they had ever conquered had turned on them the moment. Weakness showed. The humans let them go. There were no attacks on withdrawing troops. No mobs seeking vengeance. No executions of prisoners. Human soldiers stood guard along the evacuation routes, and they did not fire a single shot. Some of them even helped carry wounded Vethkai to their transports. A Vethkai commander named Thereth was overseeing the evacuation of New Helsinki. He was the same commander who had led the original occupation. For 2 years, he had fought human resistance fighters. He had lost soldiers to ambushes and bombs and poison. He had learned to fear humans. Now he stood on a landing platform and watched. Human civilians walked past his troops without violence. a human woman approached him. She was old, her face lined with grief. She had lost family in the occupation. He could see it in her eyes. She stopped in front of him. He waited for the anger, the accusations, the demand for justice. Instead, she handed him a small package. "Food," she said. "For your journey home? It is a long trip." Thereth stared at the package. He did not understand. He could not understand. "Why?" he asked. "After everything we did, why would you give us food?" The woman was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "Because the war is over. Because hatred is exhausting. Because we have buried enough of our dead, and we do not want to bury more. Go home. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them that humans know how to end wars, as well as fight them." She walked away, leaving Thereth holding the package of food. The galaxy watched these scenes with complete confusion. The Melodari tried to understand. The other elder races debated what it meant. They had spent 12,000 years believing that strength was everything, that power was the only thing that mattered, that mercy was weakness. Humans seemed to believe something different. In the months that followed, humanity took its seat on the Galactic Concord. Ambassador Vasquez, older and more tired than ever, became the voice of humanity among the stars. She did not demand that others change. She did not try to impose human values on alien species. She simply represented her people and spoke their truth. Species across the galaxy began to study humans with new eyes. They sent scholars to human worlds. They read human literature. They watched human films. They tried to understand these strange beings who fought like demons and forgave like angels. The Melodari elder Siroth wrote a treatise that became required reading for every species in the Concord. She had spent years trying to understand humanity. Now, finally, she thought she had an answer. The treatise said this: "We feared humans because they could destroy us. This is true. They have proven that they are willing to burn the galaxy to protect what they love. But this is not why they are truly terrifying. They are terrifying because they could destroy us. And they choose not to. They fight wars with absolute commitment. They accept losses that would break any other species. They never surrender, never give up, never accept defeat. But when the war is over, they put down their weapons. They reach out their hands. They help their enemies rebuild. They hold grudges for generations, and then release them in an instant. They remember every wrong done to them, and then choose forgiveness anyway. They are chaos and order, wrath and mercy, destruction and creation, all contained in fragile bodies that live barely a century. The galaxy spent 12,000 years believing we understood the nature of power. Humanity taught us that we understood nothing. Power is not the ability to destroy. Power is the ability to destroy and the wisdom to know when not to. 10 years passed. The galaxy settled into an uneasy peace. Humanity continued to grow, to expand, to explore. They built new colonies. They developed new technologies. They made friends among species who had once feared them. The Vethkai and humans, against all expectations, became allies. Trade routes opened between their worlds. Cultural exchanges began. Young Vethkai visited human universities. Young humans studied on Vethkai colonies, on the border world of New Helsinki. A Vethkai child sat on a bench in a rebuilt park. Her name was Kira, and she was the granddaughter of Commander Thereth. Her family had moved here as part of a reconciliation program. She had been afraid at first. She had heard stories about the war, about the terrible things that had happened on this world, but the humans had been kind to her. They had welcomed her to their schools. They had invited her to their celebrations. They had taught her their games and their songs. Today, she was waiting for her grandfather. He came to visit every year, on the anniversary of the withdrawal. He had something he wanted to show her. Thereth arrived, walking slowly. He was old now, even by Vethkai standards. The war had left marks on him that would never fully heal, but his eyes were calm, and there was something like peace in his face. He sat down beside his granddaughter and looked out at the park. Human children were playing nearby. Some of them waved at Kira. She waved back. I do not understand them, Kira said. The humans. After everything that happened in the war, how can they be so kind to us? Thareth was quiet for a long time. He watched the children playing. He watched the sun setting over the rebuilt city. He thought about everything he had seen and done and learned. That is the thing we never understood about them, he finally said. They do not want to rule the galaxy. They do not want revenge. They do not want power for its own sake. They just want to build, to explore, to raise their children in peace. And they will fight with everything they have to protect that right. He turned to look at his granddaughter. Once the fighting is done, they put away their weapons. They reach out their hands. They help those they have defeated. Not because they are weak, because they are strong enough to choose mercy over revenge. Kira thought about this. It was strange. It was confusing. It went against everything she had been taught about how the universe worked. Is that why the galaxy fears them? She asked. Thareth smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. Yes, that is why the galaxy fears them. They are unpredictable. They are contradictory. They are impossible to control or manipulate or understand. He looked back at the human children playing in the sunset. But that is also why, someday, the galaxy might learn to love them. Because underneath all the fire and fury, they are building something. Something new. Something better. Something that includes everyone, even former enemies. Kira watched a human girl run toward her, waving and smiling, inviting her to join a game. I think, Kira said slowly, I might already understand. She stood up and ran to join her friends. Thareth watched her go. He thought about the war. He thought about all the soldiers he had lost. He thought about all the humans who had died fighting him. He thought about the old woman who had given him food on the day of the withdrawal. He had carried that memory for 10 years. He would carry it for the rest of his life. The galaxy had spent 12,000 years believing that power was everything, that the strong ruled and the weak submitted, that this was the natural order of things. Humanity had taught them a different lesson. True strength was not the ability to destroy. True strength was the ability to build, to forgive, to heal, to reach out a hand to a fallen enemy and help them stand again. The humans had fought the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen. They had proven that they could not be conquered, could not be broken, could not be destroyed. And then they had proven something else. They could also be kind. The sun set over New Helsinki. In the park, children of two species played together, their laughter rising into the evening sky. Somewhere in the stars, a galaxy that had feared humanity was slowly learning to hope. The war was over. The future was beginning.